I'm Lisa McClendon. Let's talk about quotes and how to use them effectively in news stories. You always need to cite your sources for any facts or information that you put in a news story. And this might be a person, a document, a record, data, website, something else. You add this to your story in two ways. First, through a direct quote, which is something that you use quotation marks for. And the other is through paraphrasing, which is when you restate something in your own words. You summarize it, you sort of boil it down, you maybe get some awkwardness out of it. We'll talk about both of these later on. Direct quotes have to be word for word what a source said. It needs to be exactly what they said. You can't add something, you can't change something, you can't alter something that's in between quotation marks. It has to be exactly what someone said. A direct quote should also add something to the story, something that's interesting or zippy, adds a little bit of pizzazz to the story, adds something that's an opinion from a source, or something really emotional, something that you can't say any better yourself, something that doesn't have just straight up information in it. So here's one. This is from Wichita State coach Greg Marshall. He says he's definitely not proud of my reaction to that situation, but at some point your players have to know you're going to stand up for them. Okay, that is his input, his take on this situation. This is when you would use a direct quote. You want his own words about what happened. But before you put a quote in, you have to set the quote up. You can't just drop random quotes from people into a story. It's got to flow with the rest of the story. You've got to have context for that quote. And that means that you've got to set it up, giving the background of that situation, and make sure the speaker is clear. So it has to be clear to the readers who's doing the talking. So you might set it up this way, going back to the Greg Marshall quote. We've got the who, what, where, when happened. We've got a basketball game, 2 universities. We've got a score. We've got a date. And then we've got the news here. What actually happened, Greg Marshall missed most of the comeback. Okay, so that's our lead. We're telling people sort of what happened. All right, now we're going to do the bridge here. This is why he missed most of the comeback. Okay, and now we've got the quote for him explaining his reaction to this situation. Okay, so we've got, what's going on. We've got a little bit more about why it's going on. And then we've got the quote that is going to explain or give a little bit more depth to what's going on. You also need to make sure that there's a transition when you have 2 sources so that it's clear to readers. So if you've got somebody talking and then you switch to somebody else, that there's this break in here in the middle that lets readers know, okay, new person talking now, just to make it clear to them so they don't get to the end of the second quote and go, oh, wait, that's this person. Whoops. So this is how you don't do it, all right? We've got a quote from Michael O'Donnell. He's a political candidate. Complaining about his signs getting taken down, making an accusation to another guy about tearing the signs down. Okay, we have the end of this quote here. We have the new quote here, new paragraph, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now it may be kind of obvious from the context of this quote that this is somebody else talking, but we don't get until the very end that, oh, wait, this is Tim Norton responding to this accusation, okay? So you jump from quote to quote here with nothing that signals to readers that, oh, we're getting another person's point of view in here. So how would you do something like this? You can do it just like this. Okay, we've got the first quote, it's fine. All right, we've mentioned Tim Norton here, and then we go right here into Tim Norton. So we let our readers know, okay, this is the guy talking in the first part. Now we've got the other guy responding. Okay, and notice here, we've got a bit of a paraphrase, okay? We didn't use the whole direct quote. We kind of kept on going here until we got to, okay, we're going to directly quote this part right here, okay? So you're keeping the spirit of what he said. You're making it accurate, okay? You're not changing the context of this quote, but it sets up a little bit better here with this transition to paraphrase and then use that partial quote there at the end. It is okay to use a partial quote. If you want to use a partial quote in aid of a transition, you can. To get rid of unneeded information at the beginning or the end of a quote, you can do that. If there's somehow missing information that you really want to add in, maybe you use a partial quote and add that information somewhere else in the sentence. Okay, so how do you do that? Just like this. Okay, so we've got a quote here from Gloria Borger. She's a CNN analyst, okay? And she says, you know, here in Washington, D.C., he is somebody who had a real ambition to become the Speaker of the House should John Boehner leave. Okay. We don't need this. We don't need this. But wait a minute. Who is that? Okay, so we don't know who that is, and we would probably serve our readers a little bit better by having a name there instead of a pronoun. Okay, now you could do it like this. Put the brackets in and put the name in, but those are really clunky. Avoid brackets whenever you can. It's really hard on the readers to try and figure out, okay, wait a minute, what does this mean? Does this mean they put somebody in here? Does this mean they added something? What did they take out? And we still don't need that lead in. Okay? So you can fix this with a partial quote. Start it off with who's talking, who she's talking about, and then we have a nice, smooth quote here, getting rid of that filler at the beginning, no brackets, right? That's a whole lot smoother to read than either one, than the first one or the bracketed one. So this is how you can do this. However, beware of the air quotes, and this means when you quote a single word, okay? Don't quote a single word unless it's some really outlandish word, okay? If it's just a regular word, don't put it in single quotes. Like, I'm so happy to be here. He said he was happy to be here. I mean, and you know that that means that somebody's being sort of snotty or snarky or doubtful about that. So be careful about that. Don't do that. You also need to know when to paraphrase. If you have a quote that is wordy, somebody goes on and on and on, somebody kind of rambles around, somebody starts and then stops again, you probably want to paraphrase that, okay? So if you have a quote like this one, and the streets they're tearing up all the roads in town, it'll be, I mean, it's really tough, you know, to get anywhere, okay? That's how people talk, and when you're talking, that's fine, okay? It's all right. The grammar police are not going to burst down your door and tear you away if you talk like that, okay? But in print, it looks really awkward. And so here, it's better just to go ahead and attribute the information. So you keep that attribution with the paraphrasing, okay? You cannot, just because you're not giving a direct quote, doesn't mean you get to leave the source out. You still have to put the source in. If anytime you're adding information to a story, it's got to be sourced, okay? So you put your source in there, and then what did she say? Well, she really just said it's tough to get around town, all right? So she said road construction was making it tough to get around town. We're fine, okay? That's much better. It's much more smooth. It's really the gist of what she was saying, okay? So we're not misinterpreting her words. We're just putting it a little bit more smoothly for print. Sometimes if you have just simple information, paraphrase that too. We don't need a direct quote from Principal Skinner saying the all-school field trip will be held on May 10th. Just say that he said that. Okay, this is much better here. Sometimes if you go to a news conference or, you know, there's maybe a conference call, you know, about a business or something like that, maybe the quote will be really full of jargon, especially if somebody's reading from a prepared statement. A lot of times you'll get kind of a long, complicated sentence. It doesn't really sound like anybody normally talks. And that's maybe when you want to paraphrase too. So a lot of times you may see stuff like this. Following the road pursuit, the suspect exited the vehicle and fled on foot. Officers pursued, and after a brief altercation, the suspect was apprehended. Okay, what actually happened? The suspect was caught. Okay, that's the news here. This is the apprehended part. After a road pursuit, that's a car chase. Fled on foot, that's a foot chase. A brief altercation is a scuffle. Okay, and so notice that we've got this a line and a half shorter, and it's a little bit more clear, and it sounds like people normally talk. Make sure, again, at the end here, always credit the source of your information, direct quotes for interest, set up your quotes, be clear, be accurate, make sure that you are accurately reflecting what the source said, that you are taking that quote in context. Do not change a direct quote ever. Do not add, subtract, or change words in there. And don't make people look stupid, okay? If somebody gives you a rambling, sort of choppy quote, you don't have to directly quote it, all right? Especially if it's people who are not used to talking to the media, all right? Let's just paraphrase what they said and give that information to our readers.